One young quarterback is once again making headlines for an issue involving a vehicle, while a revealing story about Deion Sanders' coaching philosophy is reminding everyone why the Sanders family has been built differently from most football families. And by the end of this video, we'll get to perhaps the most important part of this entire story, the moment when Deion Sanders had to stop being Coach Prime and simply be a father. Because while these stories may seem separate on the surface, they're actually connected by one theme: accountability. Shedeur Sanders recently found himself dealing with another costly lesson, this time during a trip to Miami with his brother Shilo. According to reports, the brothers reunited for a workout session and spent time with friends before discovering that both of their vehicles had been towed. When they arrived at the tow yard, they learned they would each have to pay $430 to retrieve their cars. The situation appeared to be handled with humor. The brothers joked about hoping a football fan worked at the facility who might help them avoid the charges, but in the end, they paid the fines and moved on. On its own, this would likely be viewed as an inconvenient day rather than a major NFL story. The reason it generated attention is because it comes after previous traffic related incidents involving Shedeur Sanders during his rookie year. Last year, Sanders received citations for speeding and later publicly addressed those mistakes. The incidents drew criticism not only because of the violations themselves, but because of the position he occupies as one of the most recognizable young quarterbacks in football. When a player carries the Sanders name, every decision receives additional scrutiny. That's not necessarily fair, but it is reality. What makes this latest incident interesting is that it doesn't appear to involve dangerous driving or reckless behavior. Instead, it was simply a costly mistake involving parking and local regulations. Still, it serves as another reminder that young athletes often learn lessons under a much brighter spotlight than most people ever experience. And that's important because accountability has always been at the center of how the Sanders family operates. We'll come back to Shedeur in a moment, but first, there's another story that helps explain why Deion Sanders has approached parenting and coaching the way he has for years. Recently, Deion Sanders Jr. recalled a story from Coach Prime's time at Jackson State. The team was preparing for the Southwestern Athletic Conference Championship game, one of the biggest moments of the season. There was just one problem. Shilo Sanders arrived late to a meeting. For many coaches, there may have been exceptions. Some would have looked at the player's importance. Others may have considered family relationships. Deion Sanders apparently did neither. According to Sanders Jr., the rule applied equally to everyone, including his own son. As a result, Shilo had to sit out. That story says a lot about how Deion Sanders has built his reputation as both a coach and a father. According to his son, Deion sees situations in black and white. Either the standard is met or it isn't. Either the rule applies or it doesn't. There are certainly people who would argue that approach can be too strict at times, but there is another side to that conversation. Players often say they want fairness from coaches. One of the quickest ways for a coach to lose credibility is by creating different rules for different people. When a coach disciplines his own son under the same standards as everyone else, it sends a message throughout the locker room. No one is above accountability, and that message becomes even more powerful when the coach is one of the most famous figures in football. But that's not the only example of Deion Sanders taking that approach. According to Sanders Jr., there was a period when he was dealing with financial difficulties and hoped his father would step in to solve the problem. Instead, he was essentially encouraged to figure it out himself. That doesn't mean Deion didn't care. Rather, it reflects a philosophy that has followed him throughout his coaching career. Prepare people for challenges instead of protecting them from every challenge. Whether someone agrees with that philosophy or not, it clearly shaped both Shedeur and Shilo as they grew up. And perhaps that's why stories involving Shedeur often attract so much attention. People don't just evaluate him as a young quarterback, they evaluate him through the lens of everything Deion Sanders has preached for years. Meanwhile, another detail from Coach Prime's program helps explain why accountability remains such a major part of his culture. At Colorado, Deion implemented a structured fine system for players. There are consequences for being late, consequences for missing practice, consequences for poor conduct, and consequences for failing to handle responsibilities in the classroom. The message is simple: football talent alone isn't enough. Players are expected to manage every aspect of their responsibilities. That philosophy has become one of the defining characteristics of the culture Deion Sanders is trying to build. Whether someone loves it or dislikes it, there is at least a clear clear consistency behind it. The same expectations apply to everyone. And that's why the recent story involving Shedeur's towing incident becomes more interesting. Because if anyone understands accountability, it's someone who grew up under Deion Sanders. Shedeur himself publicly addressed his previous driving related issues and acknowledged that he learned from them. Those comments reflected a level of maturity that teams often want to see from young players. The reality is that professional athletes make mistakes. The bigger question is always what happens afterward. Do they learn from those moments? Do they adjust? Do they grow? Those answers often matter more than the mistake itself. And that brings us to perhaps the most meaningful story in this entire conversation. Because while Deion Sanders is often portrayed as a demanding coach, there is another side that sometimes gets overlooked: the father. Last year, Shilo Sanders faced one of the toughest moments of his football journey. After attempting to establish himself professionally, he was released by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers following the preseason. For any player, that's difficult. For an undrafted player fighting for an opportunity, it can feel devastating. According to Shilo, there came a point when it felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. That's a feeling many athletes experience but rarely discuss publicly. The dream remains alive, but the opportunities become smaller, the uncertainty grows larger, and the future becomes harder to predict. At that moment, Deion Sanders reached out to his son. The message was direct, it was honest, and it reflected the reality of the situation. The football chapter appeared to be ending. That couldn't have been an easy conversation for either side. Yet, it also revealed something important. The same father who demanded accountability was also there when football wasn't enough. The same coach who enforced strict standards was still providing support when things became overwhelming. That's often the balance that great leaders attempt to find, knowing when to challenge people, knowing when to support them, and understanding that both responsibilities matter. It's easy to focus on fines, penalties, and discipline because those stories generate headlines. What's harder to see are the moments behind the scenes when families navigate disappointment, uncertainty, and change. For the Sanders family, those moments have played out publicly more than most. Every success receives attention, every setback receives attention, and every lesson receives attention. That's simply part of being one of football's most visible families. As for Shedeur Sanders, the latest towing incident is unlikely to define anything about his career. At most, it becomes another lesson, another story, and another reminder that small mistakes can become big headlines when you're one of the NFL's most recognizable young players. But perhaps the larger takeaway is the culture surrounding him. A culture built around accountability, a culture built around consequences, and a culture built around preparing people to handle both success and failure. Whether it's arriving late to a meeting, receiving a traffic citation, dealing with financial challenges, or facing the possibility that a football career may not go according to plan, the underlying message remains the same. Actions have consequences, and growth comes from how those consequences are handled. Before we wrap up, here's the question that makes this story so interesting. Do you think Deion Sanders' tough love approach is the best way to prepare young athletes for professional football, or is there a point where that style can become too demanding? It's a fascinating debate because the Sanders family continues to provide real world examples of both the challenges and benefits that come with that philosophy. And as both Shedeur and Shilo continue navigating their own paths, that conversation probably isn't ending anytime soon.